February's 7.9 inflation rate shocked everyone. It was literally the highest rate in the last few decades. But experts calmed this down by saying that we have reached the peak and the Fed will do everything necessary to bring that number down. But March's inflation rate turned out to be even worse, climbing to 8.5%. Prices in the US climbed to their highest rates since 1981. If you think about it, that number is literally a catastrophe, since inflation shouldn't be more than 2%, and that number is literally 4 times higher. It also has a psychological impact. If people think that prices will increase further, they will rush to the shops to buy the goods that they want before prices rise further, which will boost the demand and eventually ends up creating even more inflation. The Fed is in a paradox here. On one side, it wants to raise rates to finally control inflation. On the other, raising rates significantly will cause a recession or maybe a depression. So they're just claiming that they will raise the rates, but in fact, they're doing nothing. The economy is a complicated system. It consists of hundreds of millions of people and hundreds of thousands of businesses. One wrong twist and you could take the economy into a crisis that will take it years to recover. But why exactly prices are rising? How long will they keep rising? Are we headed into a recession or a depression? And how to prepare for the next crisis? We will answer all of these questions and many more. But before we do that, give this video a thumbs up and let's dive in. One of the main reasons why prices have been rising is because of rising oil prices. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sent shockwaves across the world and pushed oil prices to rise significantly. In 2020, oil prices hit a negative $37, sending a signal that the end of oil is close. Renewable sources of energy were booming, and people were stuck at homes, which drastically lowered the demand for fuel. Since 2018, experts kept telling us that in the next 15 to 20 years, the world will no longer depend on oil. But now in 2022, oil is trading at over $100. Whenever a major producer of oil gets into a conflict, oil prices rise, which ends up raising prices worldwide, since the world relies on oil for transporting everything. That's why the longer the conflict drags in Ukraine, the longer the prices will keep rising. Russia might be the biggest country in the world, but its economy is as small as South Korea's one. It relies on exporting natural resources, which is both a strength and a weakness. Russia produces 12% of the world's oil and has a similar share of global oil exports. But it's also the world's biggest supplier of natural gas, accounting for 14% of total supplies. And when it comes to EU, Russia accounts for about 40% of its entire gas consumption. When it comes to coal, Russia produces 5% of the global coal consumption. Countries around the globe, especially Europe, depend on Russia for their energy. Just to give you an idea of how much the world depends on oil and gas, crude oil makes around 33% of global energy needs, coal around 30%, and natural gas comes in third place at around 24%. That totals around 87% of human global energy needs. That's why isolating Russia from the world economy is causing such an energy crisis.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy.
US and UK already banned Russian oil, but Europe can't follow up immediately since some countries depend on Russia for over 50% of their energy. As long as the conflict keeps dragging in Ukraine, energy prices wouldn't come down, which means that inflation will keep rising worldwide, including in the United States. As the prices keep rising, the purchasing power of Americans will decline since people's income doesn't rise by 8.5% every month. Lower demand leads to a decline in revenue for companies, which leads to cutting off expenses, which leads to higher unemployment, which again leads to lower demand since people don't have a source of income, and the cycle keeps going on forever. That's why inflation is dangerous. It can easily drag the economy into a recession if it's not under control. However, even if the conflict ends in Ukraine, that doesn't necessarily mean that oil prices will come down, since Russia is not intending to stop in Ukraine. At its peak, Russian Empire under the name of the Soviet Union stretched from East Germany to Afghanistan. It might not have the resources to restore all of that land, but since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia made sure to keep former Soviet republics dependent on Russia. The real goal behind the invasion of Ukraine is to make it part of Russia. In fact, Russia wouldn't stop until it gets its borders all the way to the Carpathian Mountains. Take Kazakhstan, for example, the 9th largest country in the world. Economically, it heavily relies on Russia. Back in January, a protest erupted in one of the cities. And guess whose help the president of the country asked for? Exactly, Russia. Russian forces flew all the way to Kazakhstan and crushed the protest. Once Russia takes over Ukraine, it will try to peacefully take over Kazakhstan. And if protest erupts again, Russia can use the exact same excuse to send its forces to Kazakhstan. Besides, 20% of Kazakhstan's population are Russians. If you look across most former Soviet republics, you will see a similar story, such as Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and other Central Asian republics. And some of these countries are major oil producers, such as Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan. Which means with so many conflicts ahead of us, oil prices are not going to stabilize anytime soon. That's why the US is imposing the worst ever sanctions on Russia to drain its resources so that it won't be able to start another conflict anytime soon. Another conflict that could shoot prices through the roof is the invasion of Taiwan, which is inevitable. Taiwan is one of the leading manufacturers of electronics, and China is the biggest exporter of computer chips. The world is already experiencing a shortage of computer chips. That's why you can't buy your PlayStation 5, for example, and graphic cards are now more expensive than cars. If China invades Taiwan and the US imposes sanctions on the world's second biggest economy, which soon might be the world's largest economy, a shortage of chips will literally create worldwide inflation that the world hasn't seen yet. Johnny Harris has a brilliant video explaining why China will eventually take over Taiwan. Go and watch it if you want to understand the conflict in detail. This might not happen this year or next year, but China is determined to take over Taiwan to the point where it forced the US not to recognize Taiwan. High energy prices, shortage of wheat and semiconductors are pushing experts to believe that we're not going to experience a recession, but rather a stagflation, where prices will keep rising, but economic growth slows down, and at the same time, unemployment stays relatively high. That's worst case scenario. We can make as many predictions as we want, but only time will show us how the future will unfold. The war in Ukraine might really drag Russia into thinking twice before invading another country, or might change China's mind about taking over Taiwan. These are all possibilities. That's why the upcoming financial crisis is unlike anything we have ever seen. On top of all of this, the Fed doesn't have the luxury of keeping interest rates low. It's already losing its grip on inflation. What usually causes recessions are excessive debt, like the 2008 European debt crisis, asset bubbles like the dot-com bubble, or sudden economic shocks like in 2020, when the pandemic hit the world and we all had to quarantine, and a few other reasons. The next recession seems to have to contain within itself all three reasons. The only problem is it is not clear how to prepare for this crisis. The stock market is in a bubble and the Fed might force them to fall. Higher mortgage rates are lowering demand for houses, which could push the housing market to decline. On top of all of this, inflation might not calm down, which will continuously make the dollar less valuable. So, are you supposed to keep cash, invest in the stock market, or get a 5 or 6% mortgage rate?